Platonic forms that were supposed to be we were supposed to be able to arrive at them through our own reason. So the next metaethical approach is relativism, moral relativism. And relativism says that because there is variance from culture to culture, person to person in our views, that there are no absolute right and wrong answers to moral issues. So whatever, so an example of moral relativism at the applied ethical level would be to say something like, well, here in America we have, for the most part, a tradition of freedom of speech. So, with several exceptions, we have uncensored search engines, and we're in blogs where we can criticize our government and have access to information about our government without harassment. But in China, they have a totalitarian, communist government, and that's been the tradition for some time now. And Google is restricted there, and their citizens are harassed if they criticize the government. But that's okay because that's the way their culture is, and there aren't any absolute rights and wrongs. So that's just how it is for them, and that would be a relativist a more relativist example. Pluralism. Pluralism seems to be the perspective that most of the authors in our readings seem to be most sympathetic with. In our textbook, the Spinello and Tavini textbook, there's a term that's used. I'm sorry, I didn't have this prepared. That's different than pluralism. It's a different spin on the word relativism. But it's kind of a middle ground between relativism and absolutism. And it seems, at least with my undergraduates, I haven't taught this course at the graduate level. I've taught the undergraduate level twice. And so far, I'm after this first week, I'm very, very pleased with just as an aside, I'm very, very pleased with the discussion board participation. I mean, it's overwhelming. I'm seeing I'm going to have a lot of work interacting with everybody, but it's a complete joy because getting the undergraduates to participate was kind of like pulling teeth. But so far it's been very enjoyable. But something that tripped up the undergraduates a lot was they didn't seem to understand what pluralism was. They could only understand absolutism and relativism. And I understand why, because pluralism is kind of a subtly different. Pluralism acknowledges that cultures differ, but it also acknowledges that most cultures seem to have some similar shared values. We all seem to say things like, we should protect our children, that family unity is important, that kinship is important, that harmony with our neighbors is important, that maintaining peace is important. I won't give examples. You can just brainstorm. Even the most genocidal, horrible regimes seem to even have these ideals. They may not have had them concerning those that they stomped on and wanted to stomp on and crush, but they had them among themselves. They wanted this for themselves. They wanted their children protected. They wanted, stability in their homes and things like that. And so, what pluralism says is that we have these shared values. Yet there is still this wide variance in our values otherwise. So based on that, we should kind of take these shared values in a way similar to how the absolutists take the approach to seeing all ethics as absolute, or all morality is absolute, and say, okay, we have these core values we share. Let's hold on to that and work with that in negotiating these things that are varying from our different cultures. And off the top of my head, I can't really think. I'm not going to be able to come up with something. I didn't prepare something ahead of time to think of as an example. But a great example that's very, very elaborate and detailed is the work of Raphael Capurro, who's a very, very pleasant man, very brilliant man. I met with him nearly 2 years ago up in Wisconsin at a conference in Milwaukee. Very prolific with language. I mean, he can sit and talk to people from any country, sitting around a table. He's amazing. And we'll be reading some work of his on intercultural ethics and how it's the approach. It argues that it's the approach we need to take for information ethics. So the idea is, going back to this, morality is something that's just kind of our sets of beliefs and values, and ethics is our systematic attempt to make sense of it. Pluralism would say we've got these values that are just here. There's really no need to even argue for them. Most of us can just sit here and without any argument say that is something you should not do to children. Children should not be treated that way. I don't need an argument to justify it. It's just it's what they call prima facie. On the face of it, there's no reason for you to tell me. I don't need an argument for this. And from that we can build arguments and moral theories or ethical theories and things like that. And then from that we can find shared common, maybe even things that we can compromise on. Okay, so moving on, ethical theory. Like I said, there are several ethical theories we may look at. There's the ethics of care, which is feminism, a feminist approach. It says that most theories of ethics tend to be masculine, male-dominated, overly rational, and do not take into account this kind of communal, nurturing care that don't take into account relationships.